Hello students, welcome back to the Dashadevige English grammar classes. In the last class, if you remember, we had a discussion regarding active and passive voice. We discussed what a sentence is, what are the two parts of a sentence, what is the subject, what is the predicate, and how a particular sentence can be identified as the active voice. And we also did transformation of sentences from active to passive. Now we shall go to the next exercise, and that is how are we going to transform the sentences given in the passive voice back to the active voice. Shall we begin, students? The first sentence that we have with us here is, the girl was teased by the boy. Now if you also remember, I told you most of the time the sentences in the passive voice generally has the preposition by. I would like to highlight that particular word here in this sentence. Now you have the word by, and I told you that generally whenever the sentence has the word by, you can be a little confident that it is in the passive voice. But at the same time, please do not be under the assumption that all sentences which have the word by are in the passive voice. There can be sentences in the passive voice without the use of by. Now that is a higher order of sentences. We shall have a discussion of that at a little later point of time. Now the girl was teased by the boy. Now who is the doer of the action? The doer of the action is the boy. Now the boy who is actually the doer of the action comes at the very end of the sentence, and you also have the word by, which is an indication that this particular sentence is in the passive voice. Now how are we going to change this back into active voice? Please, I would like to once again remind you that when you transform sentences from active to passive or from passive to active, do not tamper with the tenses. Do not change the tenses. ಕಾಲ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಚೇಂಜ್ ಮಾಡಬಾರ್ದು. ವರ್ತಮಾನ ಕಾಲದಲ್ಲಿದ್ದರೆ ಅದು ವರ್ತಮಾನ ಕಾಲದಲ್ಲೇ ಉಳಿಯಬೇಕು. ಭವಿಷ್ಯತ್ ಕಾಲದಲ್ಲಿದ್ದರೆ ಅದು ಭವಿಷ್ಯತ್ ಕಾಲದಲ್ಲೇ ಇರಬೇಕು. ಅಥವಾ ಭೂತಕಾಲದಲ್ಲಿದ್ದರೆ ಭೂತಕಾಲದಲ್ಲೇ ಇರಬೇಕು. So please do not change the tense of the sentence. Now you have another word called was. Now this was, if you remember, I told you we have auxiliary verbs, that is helping verbs. We also have the main verb, and here the auxiliary verb is was. So was is the auxiliary verb. What is the auxiliary verb also known as, children? It is also known as the helping verb. Now teased is the main verb. Now teased has the letters ed added to it, which means it is in the past tense. So the entire sentence that is given to us in the passive voice is in simple past. Therefore, when you change it from the passive voice into the active voice, retain it in the simple past tense itself. So the answer would be, the boy teased the girl. The boy teased the girl would be the most appropriate way of changing this particular sentence into active voice. Let's move on to the next example. The next sentence that we have here with us is, patients are looked after by nurses. I repeat, patients are looked after by nurses. Again, you have the preposition by. Okay, so this is one of the indications that this particular sentence is in the passive voice. Now who looks after the patients? It is either the doctors who treat the patients, or it is the nurses who look after the patients. So the nurses is actually the doer of the action. So the doer of the action, when you have to change it from passive to active, the doer of the action must be in the very beginning of the sentence. So we bring nurses in the very beginning of the sentence. So how do we change this particular sentence? Now before that, let us also see what is the tense of the sentence, because we are not supposed to change the tense. Now we have two verbs here. One is the auxiliary verb, also known as the helping verb. Then you have the main verb, that is looked. ಸೊ ಕ್ರಿಯಾಪದ, ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕ್ರಿಯಾಪದ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಯಾವುದು? ಲುಕ್ಡ್ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಕ್ರಿಯಾಪದ. ಕ್ರಿಯೆಯನ್ನು ಸೂಚಿಸುವ ಪದಕ್ಕೆ ಕ್ರಿಯಾಪದ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳುತ್ತೇವೆ. ಸೊ ಲುಕ್ಡ್ ಇಸ್ ದ ಮೇನ್ ವರ್ಬ್. ಸೊ ವಿ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಲುಕ್ಡ್ ವಿಚ್ ಇಸ್ ದ ಮೇನ್ ವರ್ಬ್. Again, the word looked ends with the letters ed, which means it is in the past tense. Then we have an auxiliary verb, that is are. So what is the tense of this particular sentence? It is again in simple past. So nurses look after the patients. Nurses look after the patients. Okay. Now, nurses look after the patients. How are we going to divide this into subject and predicate? Nurses is the subject and look after the patients is the predicate. So we have the subject at the very beginning, which means we have changed it from passive to active. So here one more thing that I would like to mention to you all. You might wonder, I have told that looked is the main verb and it is in the past tense, and auxiliary verb is are. Now this auxiliary verb actually is the one which is indicating the tense, students. Do not go by the word looked. Looked has ed. Of course it has ed, which means it is in the past tense, but there is also an auxiliary verb called are. So are is actually in the present tense. So your tense or the kala ಅನ್ನೋದು ಈ auxiliary verb ಇಂದ ಸೂಚನೆ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. Looked ಅನ್ನೋದು past tense ಆಗಿದ್ರೇನು ಇಲ್ಲಿ are ಅನ್ನೋದು present tense ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ you have to retain it in the simple present, though the main verb is in the past tense. I repeat, the main verb has ed added to it. It is in the past tense, but you have the auxiliary verb which is are. Are is indicating present tense. So generally the tense is indicated by the auxiliary verb and not so much by the main verb. If the auxiliary verb does not exist in the sentence, only then we go by the tense of the main verb. So do not get confused. So this particular sentence, it was deliberately chosen in order to make you understand not to go by the tense of the main verb when there is an auxiliary verb present. I repeat, do not go by the tense of the main verb when there is an auxiliary verb present. What is the tense of the auxiliary verb? That is what you need to take into consideration. So the appropriate active form of this particular sentence is nurses look after the patients. So how are you going to identify whether you have changed it appropriately or not? See if the subject has been in the beginning of the sentence. Haven't we put the subject in the very beginning? Yes, we have. So nurses is the subject, look after the patients is the predicate. So subject has appeared in the beginning of the sentence. Therefore, this is already changed into active voice. Let's move on to the next example. My pen was stolen by somebody yesterday. I repeat, my pen was stolen by somebody yesterday. Now we have the preposition by. Okay, so that means it is already in the passive voice and we need to change it into active voice. Now, my pen was stolen by somebody yesterday. Now, who is the doer of the action? The doer of the action here is somebody. So somebody is the doer of the action. Which means when you change it into active voice, somebody who is the doer of the action has to be brought at the very beginning of the sentence, because only then we have changed it from passive to active. I have told you in my last class that active voice will always have the subject at the very beginning of the sentence. So what is the tense? Let's have a look at the tense. Now we have was. Okay. Now this is not the main verb. Yes. If you remember, I listed out some of the auxiliary verbs in my last class. Is, are, was, were, shall, should, can, could, will, would, may, might, has, have, had. All these are also verbs. but they are not the main verbs because they do not denote any kind of action. They are called as auxiliary verbs. If you haven't made a note of these verbs, kindly make a note of these verbs which I just now listed out, because once again I would like to focus on the fact that we just cannot have a sentence without the verb. The verb should be there in a sentence. Either you need to have the auxiliary verb or you need to have the main verb, or sometimes you have both the auxiliary as well as the main verb. So how are you going to indicate the tense? The tense is indicated by the auxiliary verb. If the auxiliary verb does not exist, then go to the main verb and see what the tense is and retain the same tense when you change it either from the active to the passive or from the passive to the active. Now, who is the doer of the action, students? Somebody is the doer of the action. Now, who is the doer? It is the noun or the pronoun which does the action. So, somebody is the noun. So, what are we going to do it? Now, see, was is the auxiliary verb. Was is the auxiliary verb. Now, my pen was stolen by somebody yesterday. Yesterday also indicates past time, right? So, we'll bring this word called somebody at the very beginning because it is the doer of the action. So, somebody stole my pen yesterday. Somebody stole my pen yesterday. So, if you have to divide this into subject and predicate, somebody would become the subject, stole my pen yesterday is the predicate, and here this auxiliary verb is in the past tense, simple past. So, when you are changing it from passive to active, it has to be retained in the past tense, and stole is the past tense of steal. And I would also like to remind you there are three forms of verbs. Okay, one is the present tense, second is the past tense, and third is the past participle form. Now, stolen, the word stolen is the past participle form of the verb. Generally, when we change from active to passive, the verb will change to the past participle form. That is why you had the sentence as my pen was stolen by somebody yesterday. So, the stolen will change to stole when you are changing it into active voice, because passive voice generally have the past participle form of the verb. So, how many forms does the verb have? Present tense, past tense and past participle. So, when you are changing from active to passive, the verb has to be changed to its respective past participle form. When you are changing it from passive to active, then you need to change it into its past tense. So, somebody stole my pen yesterday will be the most appropriate way of changing it from passive to active. Shall we move on to the next example, students? Are you all with me? So, the next example that we have here with us is the work has been completed by my brother. I repeat, the work has been completed by my brother. Now, who has completed the work? My brother. The word brother is the doer of the action. Okay, the work has been completed by my brother. Now, we have the auxiliary verb has. I am highlighting this word. So, you have the auxiliary verb has. I have told you in my last class that when you have any of these three verbs, has, have or had, they indicate perfect tense. Has is the auxiliary verb. What is the auxiliary verb also known as, students? It's also known as helping verb. Why do we call auxiliary verbs also as helping verbs? Because they help to make the sentence grammatically correct. Now, the work has been completed by my brother. Has is the auxiliary verb, and in my last class I told you has and have. Has and have, both of them indicate present perfect. Had is the only word which indicates past perfect. Has and have indicate present perfect. Had is the only word which indicates past perfect. So if you have to identify whether a particular sentence is in the perfect tense, you just have to look out for any of these three words. Has, have or had. If you have any of these three words, then it is in the perfect tense. If you have has or have, then it is present perfect. If you have the word had, then it is in the past perfect. So you need to retain the same tense form. So the entire sentence is in the present perfect. Now why do I say it is in the present perfect? Again, I would like to highlight this particular statement, what I already mentioned to you a little while ago. Completed. Now completed is the main verb, but it has the letters ed, which means it is in the past tense. Though the word completed, which is the main verb, is in the past tense, you are not going to worry about the tense of this word. You are going to concentrate on the tense of the auxiliary verb. Always remember, students, if there is no auxiliary verb, then go to the tense of the main verb. But if you have auxiliary verb as well as the main verb, then the tense is mainly indicated by the auxiliary verb. So as I told you, has and have indicate present perfect. So though this word completed is in the past tense because it has ed added to it, you are going to the present perfect form of this word. What is that word here? Has. Has is present perfect. So the entire sentence that is here with us is in the present perfect. So when you change it into active voice, you need to retain it in the present perfect itself. So who is the doer of the action? Brother is the doer of the action, which means the doer of the action has to be brought at the very beginning of the sentence if you have to change it from passive to active. So my brother has completed the work. That would be the way in which you're going to change this particular sentence from passive to active. My brother has completed the work. My brother has completed the work. My brother is the subject. Has completed the work is the predicate. So in the active voice, the doer of the action has to come in the very beginning. So we have brought the doer of the action at the beginning. Has completed the work is the predicate. So has indicates present perfect. So we have retained this particular sentence in the present perfect itself. So the next sentence that we have here with us is, the thief has been caught by the police. I repeat, the thief has been caught by the police. So we have the preposition by. Indication of the fact that this particular sentence is in the passive voice. Now who is the doer of the action, students? The police will arrest the thief. It is not the thief who is going to arrest the police. God forbid. Let that not happen. It is the thief who is going to be arrested by the police. So the doer of the action is police. Now, do we have the main verb here? Yes. Which is the main verb, students? Caught. Caught is the main verb. Now this sentence has both the auxiliary verb as well as the main verb. Which is the auxiliary verb? Has. Has is the auxiliary verb. Caught is the main verb. The word caught is in the past tense. Are we going to look at the tense of the main verb when there is an auxiliary verb? No. We are going to ignore the tense of the main verb when we have the auxiliary verb. So what is the tense of the auxiliary verb? The previous sentence what we did also had the same word has. So has indicates, has and have indicate, I repeat once more, present perfect. Which is the only word which indicates past perfect, students? Had. So this particular sentence has the auxiliary verb as well as the main verb. What is the tense of the main verb? It is in the past tense. What is the tense of the auxiliary verb? It is in the present perfect. So the whole sentence therefore is in present perfect. So who is the doer? It is the police who actually arrests the thief. So the doer of the action is at the very end of the statement. So that doer of the action has to be brought to the very beginning of the sentence. So how are we going to change it into active voice? Please remember, we are not going to change the tense. What is the tense? It is in the present perfect. So let's bring the subject at the beginning. The police Now, if I say the police arrested the thief, what is going to happen, children? It is wrong. I have tampered with the tense if I say the police arrested the thief, because I have changed it from present perfect to simple past. If I say the police arrested the thief, because in the sentence, I'll just give you one example, students. In this particular sentence, if you say the police arrested the thief, I'm just asking you all to be a little careful, because all these are just 1 mark questions. They are objective type of questions. But if you go wrong with the tense, where you should get 1 mark, you will be deprived of that 1 mark and you will be given only half a mark because you have changed the tense. So if you say the police arrested the thief, the police becomes the subject. No doubt, you have brought the subject at the beginning of the sentence. Arrested the thief is the predicate. Fine. You have retained the pattern of the active voice. What is the pattern? We discussed this also in our last class. The pattern of an active voice is, subject plus verb plus object. Subject has to come in the beginning, followed by the verb and then the object. Now this particular sentence, what we have with us here is, the thief has been caught by the police. What is the main verb? Caught. What is the tense of the main verb? Past tense. Are we going to look into the tense of the main verb? No. Why? Because we have the auxiliary verb. Which is the auxiliary verb here? Has. What is the tense of the auxiliary verb? It is in the present perfect. That means the entire sentence is in the present perfect. So we need, when we change it into active voice, we need to retain it in the present perfect. So if you say police arrested the thief, then what is happening? You have changed it from present perfect to simple past. Okay. The sentence what has been given to us is in the present perfect. But if you write the police arrested the thief, you are changing the tense from present perfect to simple past. So you will not be awarded 1 mark. You will be awarded only half a mark because you have changed the tense. What you need to remember is retain the tense. So you write the police has arrested the thief. You write the police has arrested the thief. So the police is the subject, has arrested the thief is the predicate, and you have retained the word has. That means you have retained it in the present perfect. The next sentence that we have here with us is, her lessons have been learned by her. I repeat, her lessons have been learned by her. So here you have learned. Sometimes you have seen sentences where it is changed to learned. So don't worry. Okay. Now you have, this is in the past tense. This is the main verb. You agree, children? Learned is the main verb. The main verb is in the past tense. Okay, now do you understand why such kind of sentences have been deliberately chosen? Because you need to understand that when the auxiliary verb is present, you are going to consider the tense of the auxiliary verb and not so much the tense of the main verb. Now you have the word have. What is have? Have is the auxiliary verb. What is the tense of this auxiliary verb? It is in the present perfect. So have is present perfect. Has is also present perfect. But has indicates singular noun and have is plural. So has is singular and have indicates plural. ಏಕವಚನ ಬಹುವಚನ. ಹ್ಯಾಸ್ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಏಕವಚನ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಬಹುವಚನ. Okay, so has is singular and have is plural. Her lessons have been learned by her. So the main verb is in the past tense because the word ed is added to it, and you're not going to consider the verb, the tense of the main verb. You're going to consider the tense of the auxiliary verb, and the tense of the auxiliary verb is present perfect. So you have the entire sentence is in the present perfect. So you need to change it into active voice but retain it in the present perfect. Her lessons have been learned by her. She has learned her lessons. She has learnt her lessons is the most appropriate way of changing this particular sentence into active voice. Now you want to understand whether you have changed it appropriately or not. Just check whether you have brought the subject at the beginning. Yes, she. This is a subject. Has learnt her lessons is the predicate. So the predicate will consist of the verb and the object. What is the pattern of the active voice? It is subject plus verb plus object. Subject has come in the beginning and the verb and the object has come in the end. So she has learnt her lessons is the way you're going to change this particular sentence into its respective active voice.